Hello, my name is Uli Ziemons. I'm one of the co-directors of the Berlinale Forum Expanded section, and I'm here today with the makers of 3 of the films from our 2022 selection. And I'm very happy to welcome Kondo Heller, the director of Mutter. And we also have Uli Ziemons, he's the director of the film Diva. And with us is Charlene Bamboat. She made the film If From Every Tongue It Drips. Nice to see you all. We are super happy to have your films in the program, and we can't wait to share them with our audiences. And thank you so much for taking the time today to speak a little bit about the films with me and present them to the audience. We grouped those films together. They will not necessarily be shown together in a program in the festival, but we grouped them together because for this event today, because they all share an interest in language and translation. And language in them is sometimes joyful exercise, sometimes it's connected to identity, it's a history, it's a means of communication, and it can also, for example, if the language is not shared between people, sometimes be an obstacle that needs to be circumvented or a gap that needs to be filled with imagination. And I would like to speak with you about that. But before we do that, I would like to ask all of you to briefly introduce your films, and we will also see a clip from them. And I would like you to start, Charlene.
Hey, thanks for having me, Uli. It's nice to be on this panel and talk about this film. So If From Every Tongue It Drips looks at Urdu poetry and the erasure of queer desire from 19th century Urdu poetry. That was kind of the basis of the film. And it's done through the contemporary lives of this queer couple that live in Batticaloa, Sri Lanka, who are friends of mine. And we kind of work together on this film. In addition with my sound designer, Richie Carey, who lives in Scotland, and together we created the script, wrote it, did sound design. It's kind of a collaborative effort. But at the heart of it, it is about translation and a language and kind of moving through like time and space. Yeah.
Okay, well then let's see the clip.
गाट पे गश है कोई लूट है तख्ती पे कोई छब पे मरता है कोई हमको खुश आती आंखें चके हो लोगे इसी मुंह से मच्छियां मेरी इसी जुबां से चूसोगे तुम जुबां मेरी
आज जाने की जिद ना करो आज जाने की जिद ना करो यूं ही पहलू में बैठे रहो यूं ही पहलू में बैठे रहो आज जाने की जिद ना करो
Nicola, do you want to continue? What can you tell us about your film Diva?
Yes, so Diva is the name of Diva Kati, who is a bingo singer in Vietnam, as well as a street food vendor. So she makes noodles that she sold on the street during the lockdown. And it's also a collective effort or a couple effort, because I don't speak Vietnamese and I have never met Diva. But it's my boyfriend who translated all the material for the film and who explained me like this sort of cultural differences and how understanding of the film was this collective effort, and in the film we use subtitles and also subtitles where we told the story of how we discovered her and what we understood from her story.
Let's see a clip.
Và như những người phụ nữ khác, mình là người chuyển giới và nói khẳng định với mọi người luôn á, dù cho 5-3 năm nữa, 10 năm nữa, xã hội chấp nhận chăng nữa, nhưng mà cái chuyện tình cảm á, nó chỉ là ngoài luồng, nó không có ai quen mình suốt đời đâu, đó thì vì mình đâu có con, mình đâu có nói rõ tông đường cho người ta. Rồi lúc đó đi xin ai mà chịu, không chịu đâu, thấy BD mình không chịu, không có chịu, mình nhìn BD thiệt luôn á. Rồi sau thôi không xin nữa, tôi không xin làm nữa. Rồi lúc đó mình quyết định mình đi hội chợ lô tô, bán những cái tấm vé lô tô gì đó, kiếm được đồng nào hay đồng đó. Rồi đến khi lớn, từ từ làm người lớn lên rồi mình có tiền mình đi đặt lên thêm túi ngực. Hồi xưa là mình đặt mình bơm silicon, rồi bây giờ mình đặt thêm túi ngực vô. Rồi lúc đó mình có tiền sửa mũi, lúc đó mình làm cái đặt cái kia, đúng không? Rồi để làm gì mình làm đẹp lắm để mình đi bán bánh trang.
Okay, and last but not least, Kondo, your film Mutter.
Hey, it's so nice to be with all of you here. Yeah, so I am a poet, and I always say that I'm a poet who makes films. So the idea for this film mainly came from thinking about the word utterance and thinking how an utterance is followed by silence. So I was thinking about utterance and what this kind of does. And then I was thinking about it with other poets that I love and that have kind of helped me think about poetry as well. So I included that in the poem, and there's a lot of uttering that kind of happens, and there's not really a question of response. It's more of kind of listening through the film, and we move through the different rooms of a house, and we think about, as in the film, it kind of thinks about what we hear in every room, what is uttered in the room, what stays in the room, and this is done through poetry. So yeah, that's the film.
I believe you have the trailer of the film.
Kenyans are the second most fluent English speakers.
English isn't a good language to communicate in, mostly, I would imagine, because people try to speak English instead of trying to read it.
What do I have? 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 What do I have?
So I already mentioned, or I think it also became clear from the clips and from what you were saying, that that one shared interest of the films is language and translation, but they're also in one way or another about performing and performance of identity and of that language in a sense. So poetry, Kondo, you said already, your film is a poem in a sense, can be considered a poem itself. Poetry plays a big part in If From Every Tongue It Drips, the act of translating the poem, of reading poetry to each other, of sort of interpreting poetry and thinking about poetry. And Diva, the protagonist in Diva, is a performer herself. She's on stage, and she's a performer by trade, and not only on stage but on social media, and also in her food stall, where we see her a lot of the time, and where she sort of broadcasts all the material that you use in the film, Nicolas. So, and these performances are kind of closely related to identity, and I was wondering if you could speak about how identity in your films is formed by language, in a way, and how the films think about that. Maybe Charlene, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I guess for myself, like my starting point is that because I speak so many half languages, and my mother tongue is kind of my third language now at this point, but English being my first, because I've lived in Canada most of my life. But I'm originally from Pakistan. I grew up there. But Urdu is my second language, which is the national language of Pakistan, Gujarati being my first, which I only spoke with my grandparents. So it's kind of complex in this way. And I've always been interested in Urdu poetry and Urdu as a language itself. But when I was working with these friends of mine in Sri Lanka, they speak Hindi, which is spoken Urdu is the same, but they can't read it, and they speak Tamil. So the film was kind of translated, like identity is very, I mean, for lack of a better word, hybrid throughout this entire film, with many people coming together who speak many different languages and converge in over multiple languages. And so the way that the poetry worked is that I read this 19th century Urdu poetry in English and got a translator to translate it back to Urdu, and then got Pony, the main character in the film, to translate it to Tamil, but read it in Hindi, which sounds like Urdu. So it's just many, many different layers of things that happen throughout the process, which is kind of nice, because I think it allowed us all to think about how we connect in between languages. And I think this in between space is very important for me in general, in most of the work that I make, in the way that I think, this gray area. And it really, I felt like it came out in this film.
Yeah. Kondo, for you as somebody who works with language, as their material in their art making, I think some of the things that Charlene touched on might also be true for your film, or you're thinking about it. I mean, there are, I think, 4 different languages in your film also. And the question of who speaks which language is kind of repeatedly alluded to. I mean, I think we heard that in the trailer also, this question of sort of what sort of access is provided by speaking a certain language, economic access and social access. So, yeah, can you say a bit more about the different languages in your film and how they interact or kind of sometimes stand beside each other,
Yeah, I can just echo what Charlene said, definitely about the in-between space. That's kind of a good space for me to be in as well. But in the film, I think I was thinking also about like how in certain language, even voice changes. For me, I feel like my pitch could go higher or lower sometimes, depending on the language. So, and also within the language itself. So sometimes that's something that I was thinking about, and also thinking about how in one language, I can address someone in certain ways and send them messages that are only for them, that I can't do in another language, and kind of how that being kind of service, or being like in a kind of like kind of being together in a language, in kind of a sea of languages that are also part of me. I think that is something that I was thinking about. So there's a conversation that happens in the film with my uncle, and we speak Swahili, and but he actually speaks Kidaraka, which I don't speak. So that kind of is like, so he would sometimes say these words to me, but they're for me, but I don't understand them, but they're for me. So it's a thinking around that.
Yeah, I think that was something that I was thinking about also in relation to all of your films, the this connection between language and intimacy and tenderness, you know, and I want to maybe come back to that also for Charlene and Kondo, but I think in your film, Nicola, it might not be so much in the forefront, this idea, but it's very much embedded in the way you made the film. You already said that it's a work that was made by a couple, you know, sort of one translating for the other, as happens in From Every Tongue It Drips also, or speaking for the other. So there is a certain tenderness, sort of implied tenderness in this, you know, sort of imagining you and your partner kind of watching these thousands of hours of video and one simultaneously translating for the other, while not being completely fluent in the language also, right? So there is this sort of loss or gaps that need to be filled that then again also relate, I think, to the way that your film can be seen as a sort of fan or love letter to this performer who is like a star in her own right in this social media space that she is broadcasting to. So I was wondering whether you could say a little bit more about the sort of process of finding and compiling and understanding, making sense for yourself of these videos, and also how you see, like, what your relation to the performer, the protagonist of your film is.
Yes, so it was. I guess it was a very long. It was a very long process, and it was intimate in the sense that we really we were together in front of these thousands of videos, and so Dustin would translate live to me, and we would choose. But at some point, we would also, I mean, to go quicker because this was a lot of material. We also decided to split and to be like, okay, you can just mark the videos that we still need to watch together, but I would rather not watch them with you, which ultimately brought some tension between us, because we were like, yeah, I am directing the film, but you leave me to do all the bad stuff. And at some point we could not combine our schedules actually anymore. For the last months, I was away and I was too busy, and he had to finish and cut the part of the film on his own. And so it actually brought, I mean, this intimacy was actually more of like some kind of issue or disputes than something really loving watching Diva. But it's not, I mean, I guess what kept us doing it, despite these difficulties, is that we kept finding things about Diva that we realized we did not understand. So we wrote a pitch at the very beginning, and we invented most of it. We said that Diva was an activist, and that's only what we felt that she can be. We needed to make it sellable somehow. And what was funny is that at the end, we talked to her and we realized that, yeah, we were not that far from what was the truth or Diva's reality.
Hmm. I mean, this, what you're saying now, this sort of imagining how somebody is, that is sort of one of the relations that is also in the film, because she is this sort of star, or this person that you as admirers sort of are trying to get close to, but you're trying to get close to an image that she's portraying of herself, right? Which is interesting also because she's doing that in this realm of social media that is really, I guess, predicated on this kind of mixing of like, what is the real person, what is the persona that somebody is portraying. And can you say a few more things about like Diva's status in this? Like what does she do? Like what is her reach? Like how, you know, in her film she comes across as a sort of verified superstar in a way. And I was wondering, like, sort of like, what is her impact, or what is her yeah, what type of an audience does she have also? Because I'm guessing you are not her typical audience, as somebody who doesn't speak the language and watches these videos in Europe.
So yes, she has a mostly Vietnamese audience, and she has literally millions of followers. She uses mostly YouTube for her videos. I mean, recently, I mean, like she posted for Lunar New Year, and she gets like 1,000 likes on Facebook within minutes. So she's really really popular in Vietnam. And I guess only in Vietnam. What was strong when we showed her the movie is that, in fact, she does not imagine her audience as being outside Vietnamese community at large, or Viet Q, like Vietnamese expatriates. So even when we told her about the film being shown in the festival in Berlin, she's still addressed to the Vietnamese community in Berlin. Mm-hmm. So this was something important in terms of but I like that there is a gap between what we see between our expectations and her expectations, and I guess part of the project is built on this gap.
Yeah. Maybe that's a good segue to get back to Charlene. You were also talking about this, or you and Kondo, you were both talking about this in between space, or which might also be described as a gap, maybe, or and you visualize that in between space through the use of subtitles and titles and texts, in a way. Like there's a lot of things are happening at the same time on screen. We saw a little bit of that. It's a very sort of inventive and unique way of using subtitles. So could you talk a little bit about that, about this concept of color coding, who's speaking, where the sounds are from, you know?
Yeah, a lot of that came from me working with this group in Glasgow that does captions called Collective Text. And the one person I work closely with, called Amelia Beatrice, we kind of started chatting even before I was editing the film. So, and this is kind of how I like to work. It's also how I work with the sound designers. It's just like building relationships over a certain amount of time with people. And I tend to work with people who I already have worked with, or my friends, so we already have some sort of like common understanding. But Amelia I had met while working on this film, and we just started chatting and like thinking about how to think about captioning creatively and how to think about access in a creative manner. And so it was through their work that a lot of the color coding and stuff came in, because there's so many different sounds going on in the film. And because the soundtrack was recorded in Scotland, in Montreal, where I am, and then in Sri Lanka, where the couple live in the film. And so we did a lot of listening exercises together where we recorded sound and then the sound designer mixed it. But you can tell the difference, like you can kind of tell the difference between the spaces. But we were like, how do you visualize that for an audience that is hard of hearing or can't hear? And so then color coding worked, but then also it's a matter of like choosing colors. Which ones do you pick for represent which place? All these kinds of things. But I think that the captioning, just the captions themselves, added another layer to the film and added a context that perhaps was missing otherwise. Because when I was editing it, and we did kind of more straight up captions, like just translating what you might hear, there was a layer of context missing for people that I think didn't understand the politics or the poetry of this particular time period in South Asia. So then the captions allowed me to almost act as like an annotation to the film. But, you know, there's the dance you do of like how much information to put in, how much to not put in. You can't translate for everybody everything all the time. So it was a lot of this thing going on, which I often have in my work to think about. And then with the intertitles, with the poetry, I think it was nice for me to combine that, almost acting as caption, but also in the different languages, to look at the work that the two translators in Tamil and in Urdu had done, So it kind of worked in that way. And then also it gives the audience maybe a little bit of a break from like looking at footage. So it's kind of combining all these different things together.
Yeah. No, what I find so beautiful is that, for example, like sometimes, we see footage of songs being sung or poetry being recited, and then we don't get a translation of the words, but we get a sort of like a description of the feeling, of the emotion that is being translated, the way the voice sounds, is it a harsh or a tender voice? And so that was really, as you said, it adds a whole nother layer of kind of communicating, that, what you see maybe in those poems also to the audience, and it's quite effective. And interestingly, like taking that from a practice that is that comes out of trying to create access for people who are hard of hearing, but that can open up so much more also for people who don't have trouble hearing, right? So I think that's it's a wonderful kind of illustration of what that can do, in a way.
Totally. And I worked with actually two people, one of whom is from Delhi and is kind of like a queer scholar, an activist, and asked him to actually do that translation. And another one is a musician who lives in Toronto, but his family is from Goa, and he's a jazz musician. And so to ask these two people, so it really was multiple voices translating multiple things to bring it together. And I thought that was a nice way to think about it, because in the end, it did feel like a film where multiple people were coming together to create something.
Yeah. Kondo, you also use subtitling in your film, and it's sort of interesting. When I first watched the film, I didn't even realize it, because I'm so used to watching films with subtitles and sort of reading along with the subtitles and being sort of used to that. A lot of the time they're maybe in English, but the spoken language is not English. But you actually don't use the subtitles to translate into like one language, but it's doubling most of the time, I think, or maybe all the time, the language that is spoken. So there is no translation in that sense going on, which might also relate to what you already said. There's sometimes words that you don't understand, but they're still for you. So a language is for a specific person. So I was wondering about the decision behind that. This sort of not having subtitles but not using them in the quote-unquote unconventional way. And I also wanted to hear more about this idea you already spoke about of the different rooms in the house being sort of having specific things that can be said, and whether that also relates to languages. Like, did you also divide the house up into languages? So there's one language spoken in this room and another one in that room?
Yeah. So in terms of I think I was also thinking around translation and like what is usually expected of the translator. It's like, I expect you to make me understand. And it's like, yeah, if you do speak this language, then it will be mirrored back to you. But I'm not going to, but like kind of having someone sit with that as well is like, yeah, this is the language being just written in text so that maybe someone who can't really hear can read it, who speaks the language as well. So those were my thoughts around that. But it was also me writing down what was being said to me again, and kind of also remembering that I can actually write in this language, which was also this process that I needed to go through. And I'm kind of sharing that process as well in the film. And also back to that message of something being for you, it goes also back to these, so in Mombasa, where I grew up and where my mom's from, we have these lesos, and lesos always have like a piece of poetry written on them. There's just they're like a kind of a piece of cloth that you can wrap around. You can do many things with it. And the poetry or the piece of kind of, it can be like a proverb or something. Usually when someone gifts that to you, it's also a language. So it's also like a saying, like a message to you that I may not vocalize, but this is your message. And also in the film, I tried to weave that in as well. So sometimes you do see like lessons that I've tried to make that kind of also have these sayings. But to go back to your questions about the rooms, I also think about what we can overhear in different rooms. So in the house that I was staying in the living room was facing the street. So I would often sit in there and I would sometimes hear things and they would just, they would kind of be like interrupting thoughts or sometimes even intrusive thoughts that are coming, but they're coming from outside the window. And then also thinking about like how in the bedroom, which was higher up, there weren't really windows. I couldn't really hear anyone but myself in my head. So that's kind of also what happens there. And then, the kitchen as a space, I like listening to the radio in the kitchen. So there's like some static that you hear and kind of thinking about how many voices kind of convene in the kitchen. So just thinking about like voices and and just like utterances and how they travel in different rooms and how they visit you in different rooms. So that was like my idea of it.
Yeah, the staying in one's house or being sort of like thrown back onto oneself brings me to something that we almost can't escape talking about. That is how how so the pandemic has shaped these productions. I mean, Charlene, it's a production across three different continents that was, I'm guessing, shared through Zoom. There are sometimes these very nice moments where one of your protagonists sort of addresses you, and it's unclear whether you were actually sort of like connected at that time or whether they would send it to you at a later date. With Nicolas, I mean, you say it, you write it out. I cannot travel there right now, so that I'm wondering sort of how this not being able to travel also informed the form that you found for your film, and with Kondo as well. I mean, I was sort of there's, of course, it's my projection onto that setting, but it seems like sort of this kind of lockdown situation in a sense also, where one is confined, for lack of a better word, confined to one's house, and the mind starts to wander in a sense. So I don't know who wants to go first, but I was curious about that aspect of your films, whether you were also consciously sort of trying to work with that, or whether it was just something that happened to be the circumstances under which you were working. Who wants to go? I'll ask Nicolas to say something about it.
So I have a hard time to see. I mean, of course, it informed the work. I can talk about the work in general because my feeling is that I ended up doing a lot of archive works during this time of COVID. I guess at first I was very resistant to this idea that suddenly the work, I mean, I do mostly participative work, so it was like I didn't see how I could change the nature of my work. And I saw a lot of people doing things like we do now online. And I was very resistant. I was like, oh, I'd rather not work and wait. But it happened that it was not like this, and that I needed to keep on going. And that I found like a first archive, and then the second one being Diva, which was more, I mean, not so much an archive, but more something of found footage online, let's say. But it's only recently that I was like, oh, it's another archive film, actually.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And Charlene, was this sort of setup of the production, was it planned like that from the get-go, or was it like a longer project that then had to take this form?
I had been thinking loosely around this project for many years. Like the way I work is that things just sit in my head for a bit and then eventually they manifest somehow. But I was actually gonna go shoot a film in Pakistan, in Karachi, where I grew up, in March 2020. And I canceled like the day I had to leave. So it was, all that happened. And then I was just thinking about, I didn't want to make similar to Nicola. I didn't want to make the film long distance or anything. So I just sat with it for a bit. And then the film was similar-ish. It was around like poetry, language, and theater, more specifically, a specific type of theater. So I think sitting with ideas and time in the house really created, I just was playing around with archive that I already had at home, like just filming things over the years, putting things together in a timeline on Premiere and just trying to like navigate it using found footage, capturing footage from like Instagram live videos, things like this. And so I think it slowly came together over, like I was just slowly building it. And a lot of it also was just trying to keep busy and keep my mind occupied at the time like this, with all the uncertainty. And then in the summer of 2020, I don't know, I just was reading something and I thought I would just contact my friends, Ponni and Sarala, the ones, I know them from Canada, but now they live in Sri Lanka. And so I just asked them if they wanted to participate in this thing with me. And then they said yes. And so a lot of it was done over WhatsApp, like it was done like Dropbox, WhatsApp, Zoom, like any different means of them sending me footage. And it was quite cyclical in this way of, I would give them a rough idea of what I wanted, and then they would film it and send it to me. And it didn't always work out that that's what I wanted, but it's also a matter of like letting go of control of how to navigate the stuff, And then same with the sound, it worked in this way. So it kind of was very much born out of a lockdown moment, although some of the ideas were there prior to.
Mm-hmm. And Kondo, how's that for you? I mean, I guess one has this image of a poet being this sort of solitary person anyway, who's sort of conjuring up the poetry. But was it different? I mean, was it sort of like born out of, okay, I'm here in this house, what do I do? Or was it, is that the way you work in general anyway? Or?
I was thinking around, actually I had the idea for the film for a while because I had this idea of thinking of like rooms, the poem, the verse, like I went into this thing of thinking of the like every room can be like kind of a verse of poetry, and I was thinking about that, and then I found myself in the moment that we all found ourselves in, and I was like, okay, I'm in this home that I shared with I think we were 8 people. So we were all together in this home, and I was thinking, I was really happy there because we were cooking one another meals, we were taking care of each other, and I was like, this is what home feels like, because I've moved around a lot. So I think my questions were more around home as well, and how do I bring home into a home? And I think that was one of the questions. But in the film, actually, there's footage of a lot of homes that I've lived in. It's actually not just the one home I was in. I also found, I went through different films that I'd made, or different little clips that I'd made of different rooms that I've lived in the last 4 years, and they also appear in the film. But yeah.
Well, it makes for one very nice, coherent house in the end, in the film. Okay, everybody, I think we have, our time is running out, which is a shame. I would love to keep speaking with you. I'm looking forward to see you all soon in Berlin, in person. Thank you again for your films, and thank you for taking the time today. So take care. See you soon.
Thanks, Uli.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Uli. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Goodbye.